some people who have been eating a fairly good diet, but with the addition of donuts, pie, and ice cream, will find that if they just increase their protein amounts 3 times a day, the cravings and the mood problems associated with these brain deficiency syndromes will really diminish.
Welcome to the Wise Traditions podcast, sponsored by the Weston A. Price Foundation for Wise Traditions in Food, Farming, and the Healing Arts. We are your source for scientific knowledge and traditional wisdom to help you achieve optimal health.
I'm your host, Hilda Labrada Gore. This is episode 139, and my guest is Julia Ross. Julia is the author of many best-selling books, and her latest is The Craving Cure. And no, you are not experiencing deja vu. We had Julia on last week, and we asked her to be a part of another conversation because she is an expert on what drives our cravings, and today we're going to talk about what we can do about them. So we take our discussion one step further than last time. Not only do we review the different types of cravers, but we talk about how to curb those cravings. The foods that we crave can tell us quite a lot about what is going on in our bodies, as well as what nutrients our brains may be lacking. Some of us may be lacking more than others, but be that as it may, by identifying what type of food craving patterns we fall into, we can better address what's missing and change things up for good. Before we dive into the conversation, we want to recognize our sponsors. First and foremost, this podcast is brought to you by the Weston A. Price Foundation. Our annual conference is coming up. You guys, it's in Baltimore this November. I'm so excited. That's right in my backyard. And we want you to join us. Find out about all of the amazing offerings, speakers, and more at wisetraditions.org. And Green Pasture. Green Pasture products are inspired by the research of Dr. Weston A. Price. Traditional diets were much more rich in vitamins and nutrients than our diets today. This is why Green Pasture products offers fermented cod liver oil, concentrated butter oil, and coconut oil in a variety of products and blends. Boost your health with wholesome, healthy Green Pasture products today. Go to greenpasture.org. And Just Thrive Probiotic and Antioxidant, the probiotic everyone's talking about. Go to thriveprobiotic.com. Welcome to Wise Traditions, Julia.
I'm glad to be with you again.
We were talking about the different kinds of cravers last time we talked, and I want to ask you, what craver do you identify with the most?
I've generally been blessed with minimal cravings, but there's definitely one of the 5 types of craving that is a standout for not only me in the past, but for my entire family. We have all been ice cream cravers. I'm the only one who has cured her cravings, but both of my brothers and my father are famous for their generally moderate eating habits, but when it comes to ice cream, they've just got to have it. They've got to have it every day. In spite of the fact that one of my brothers is lactose intolerant, definitely had reactions every time he ate ice cream. So the type 3, the comfort craver, is really somebody who doesn't have quite enough endorphin, our natural comfort and pleasure-providing neurotransmitter. So we're always looking for something that will give us a little bit of pleasure, just a little bit of pain relief if we're having a hard day. And fortunately, as we'll get into later, there are natural ways of increasing our endorphin production so that we don't need ice cream or chocolate, which is even a more universal solution for people with this type 3 comfort craving syndrome.
I'm very eager to talk about how we can crack that craving code, as you put it in your book. So I want to go through the different types of cravers and then how we can curb those cravings. Let's start with type 1, the depressed craver. Remind us what characterizes that kind of person and what steps they can take to curb that craving.
Well, the kind of cravings that the type 1 suffers from, those symptoms are all generated by a deficiency in our natural antidepressant, serotonin. So type 1s who don't have enough serotonin are typically on the pessimistic side. They're negative rather than optimistic and positive. They tend to be on the irritable side, but very significantly on the worried or fearful side. and their low self-esteem is often an issue, and often they have a sleep issue. As a matter of fact, the afternoon and evenings are the hardest for them because serotonin is partly stimulated by an amino acid called tryptophan and also stimulated by sunlight. So when the sun goes down, these depressed cravers tend to be looking for something that will relieve some of these negative mood symptoms. For example, a big bowl of sugar-loaded cold cereal is a popular one among our female clients at my clinic.
What would be a step they could take?
Lucky for type 1 depressed cravers, there are two forms of the amino acid the brain uses to make more serotonin and its natural antidepressant symptoms. And they're both available at any health food store, online, readily available and inexpensive. The basic amino acid is called tryptophan, and there's another form of it called 5-hydroxytryptophan, or 5-HTP, which is perhaps even a little more available at this point. These amino acids come in a standard strength, and we advise all of our clients, in fact, we do trialing in our virtual clinic, and we advise all the readers of the book to open a capsule and empty it into their mouths and moisten their mouths with a little water and let it kind of sink in through the mucous membranes. And they typically notice within 5 minutes how that particular amino acid is affecting them. And they'll notice not only do their cravings disappear, but their negative moods really smooth out. So it's a lovely experience for the type 1 depressed craver. And about 80% of type 1s do beautifully on either tryptophan or 5-HTP, but the book's Chapter 12, which gives very, very specific advice about each of the amino acid solutions to these different craving types, helps readers decide which one to start with. For example, 5-HTP is a little more energizing. So if you have sleep problems, you might want to start with tryptophan.
Now, these amino acids, are they available in food form as well? Can we get them from our foods? It sounds like if someone's...
It's very hard to get this particular one from food. We're experiencing almost an epidemic of low serotonin symptoms. It's why antidepressant drugs are so popular. So we're not making enough serotonin to surface ourselves in a normal way. But in, let's say, a lamb chop, complete protein, a good array of all 20 amino acids that are available in food in one serving, but there's much less of tryptophan than almost any other 19 amino acids contained in that lamb chop. This is one case where the supplements are particularly valuable as a jump start. But it's important to say that these amino acids are not a permanent fixture. They're not needed permanently because we are combining the amino acid jump start supplementation with a lot of additional protein from food, which will, over time, supply all the aminos we need, and then the supplementation is no longer needed.
That's right. I remember that you were recommending a high-protein diet at the end of our last episode.
Yes, because some people who have been eating a fairly good diet, but with the addition of donuts, pie, and ice cream, will find that if they just increase their protein amounts 3 times a day, the cravings and the mood problems associated with these brain deficiency syndromes will really diminish. And then they can decide whether they also need a little extra support from the amino acids. Most of our clients over the years have not been able to completely eliminate the cravings only with food, but with the combination of the amino acids and a higher protein diet, they've done beautifully.
Fascinating. Well, let's move on to type 2 now, the crashed craver. What characterizes this type of craver?
Well, the crash is what characterizes them, and that comes when they skip meals. So the most common example is the typical American who skips breakfast, and they find that about 10 o'clock they're crashing. They're no longer able to sustain their work performance just on coffee. Their attention is diminishing. They've got a headache. They're getting irritable. Stress is getting to them. And they are really wanting to go down to the candy machine and get something sweet immediately to lift up that crashed blood sugar situation.
I know I've seen so many T-shirts and little memes that are like, no talkie before coffee. And like everybody's just so dependent, but first coffee and all that stuff. So I get it. I think there is prevalence of this particular kind of craver in our society today. What can they do? What steps can they take to
Well, they
address
have
it?
the simplest, even though it may be the most common craving type, they have the simplest solution. One amino acid takes care of any garden variety hypoglycemic and has a tremendously positive effect on diabetics who veer from high blood sugar to low blood sugar to high blood sugar, as you know. And that amino acid is called L-glutamine. L-glutamine is quite famous in the medical literature for all kinds of things, supporting the immune system, healing damage from radiation and chemotherapy treatment, sparing muscle in post-surgery patients who typically lose an enormous amount of muscle mass within hours. It's really been used therapeutically quite a bit, and its effects on diabetics are being researched now too. Diabetics are known to be really deficient in this amino acid as a group, and so it makes sense that people with blood sugar problems should look to this amino acid for help. And again, it comes in a capsule, 500 milligrams is a standard dose. And again, it's a great amino acid to trial if you have the symptoms of the crash craver, because those kinds of cravings will just disappear within a really short time. And glutamine tastes good, so people sometimes actually use it as a powder. And if they're really desperate to curb a craving, they may open a capsule and just let it dissolve in their mouths because it's very pleasant tasting.
Now, if I could identify with one of these craving types, I think that would be me, because I used to have the blood sugar lows, the dips and spikes. And when I changed to a higher protein diet, much as you've been discussing, I felt that go away. And eggs, I understand, are a good source of L-glutamine. And I have upped my egg consumption, and I just feel really great.
I'm glad to hear it. Well, yeah, I think you're a great example of someone who was probably eating well, but wasn't quite up to your perfect amount of protein. And a lot of people, since the 1970s, when we really cut our protein consumption really quite radically, and subsequently we become so addicted to carbohydrates that really we're not interested in protein. Bring on the sugar and the starch, and we've lost interest in protein, which absolutely does not stimulate cravings the way sugar and starch does. In fact, the opposite. And there's a lot of research showing that of the three macronutrients, fat, carbohydrate, and protein, protein is by far the nutrient most likely to protect us from craving and overeating.
Really? I would think it would be fat.
No, isn't that interesting?
Yeah.
But the truth is that protein sources, especially the complete protein animal sources, are as much as 50% fat. So it's pretty hard to distinguish out. But, in the studies that have actually given protein powders and things to make it very clear which macronutrient is effective, protein wins out. Of course, science is still suffering from its prejudice against fats. So we don't know if the research is being properly done when it comes to fats at this point either.
Since you said animal sources, Julia, I want to ask you, what of the vegetarian or vegan that is trying to avoid some of these animal-sourced foods?
We have never seen a vegan in our clinic who was thriving on a vegan diet. They've typically lost energy, lost muscle mass, and lost track of what to eat to feel better, which is why they're coming to us. And what we've found is that they have an ethical commitment typically that's very, very strong, and it's understandably strong. But it's based on basically the love of animals. And what we've had to discuss with our clients over and over again is that we are animals, and we are omnivores. Our whole history is combining plant foods with animal-based foods. So we have told them that we just haven't had much luck with helping vegans because they just can't get enough protein in the foods that they're eating. They can get a little bit of all of the 20 amino acids, but very little, whereas animal sources are very generous. And what we need in a situation where we're so depleted that we're having these cravings and other symptoms of neurotransmitter deficiency is generous amounts of protein, therapeutic amounts of protein to restore the levels, because all of our tissues are made out of protein. Of course, fat is very important, and water, of course, is very important, but the structures themselves depend, including the bones. We think of the bones as all mineral, but they're primarily protein. So the solid parts of our body are all made out of protein. So there are thousands and thousands and thousands of processes in the body and tissues in the body that require generous amounts of protein, and that includes our DNA. For that to function properly, we need a good array of all the nutrients, vitamins, minerals, and proteins and good fats.
Coming up, Julia continues the conversation about the various types of cravers and what we can do to curb those cravings. We want to pause now and recognize our sponsors. The Weston A. Price Foundation. We are committed to helping you and the world eat better. And please come on out to our Wise Traditions Conference this fall in Baltimore. It's November 16th to the 18th. We have all kinds of information, amazing speakers, fantastic food, and connections that will last a lifetime. So go to wisetraditions.org and register today. And Green Pasture. Green Pasture sells a variety of products to boost your health. Organic virgin coconut oil, virgin coconut ghee, skincare balms, and much more. Their fermented cod liver oil comes from the prolonged soaking of wild cod livers in brine, which allows cod livers to naturally ferment. It's a gentle process compared to that used by most highly industrialized cod liver oil manufacturers. Personally, I take their cod liver oil daily, and I rarely get sick. I am so thankful for Green Pasture's thoughtful, traditional practices and products. Go to greenpasture.org and place your order today. And Just Thrive Probiotic and Antioxidant. Most probiotic pills just pass through our bodies without achieving the desired effect. Just Thrive is the first 100% spore-forming probiotic that arrives alive in the intestines naturally. It supports optimal gut health, digestive health, immune health, and it delivers antioxidants. It's great for adults, kids, the whole family, the probiotic everyone's talking about. Just Thrive Probiotic and Antioxidant. Visit their website at thriveprobiotic.com. So, Julia, now let's talk about the comfort craver. I think you said this is the category that you fell into
I can
at one
identify
time.
with this.
We've already covered some of what characterizes this type of craver. What can they do? What steps can they take? What amino acids should they eat to curb that craving?
Well, again, there are two choices, but they both have one amino acid in common. And that amino acid is a very unusual one. It's called D-phenylalanine. So that's the name of one of the options for a type 3 comfort craver. The other is D-L-phenylalanine, which combines two different forms of this particular amino acid and is a little bit more energizing, I would say, is the difference between these two. But D-phenylalanine is an amino acid that's been extensively researched in medicine because, particularly on surgical wards, so much morphine was being given, particularly in the 90s. The pharmacologists were desperately trying to find another option for raising our endorphin levels, for enhancing our natural pain-relieving neurotransmitters so that we wouldn't have to rely so much on opiate drugs. And, of course, with the opiate drug crisis now, this is a terribly important issue. And one of the opiate drugs most used by Americans is chocolate. So we can relieve our chocolate cravings quite easily. Our ice cream cravings, bread cravings, these are all sort of famous substances that comfort cravers derive their benefits from, starting with a minimum dose, which is, again, 500 milligrams, and trialing a capsule of DPA, which is a little harder to find but easy to find on the Internet, or a capsule of DLPA. And both of them, one more than another depending on the person, will eliminate the need for that kind of pleasurable experience. And so even when you try to imagine a chocolate bar, which is something that we ask our clients to do when they first sit down, we say, if you could have anything you wanted, you'd have to worry about calories or weight or anything, what would it be? And they typically say, seriously, a Snickers bar. After we've given them a trial of DPA or DLPA, we ask them again, 5 minutes later, how does that Snickers bar sound right now? And they will honestly look sort of blank because they've forgotten it.
You're right. There is a chocolate situation going on here. I never quite thought of it, as you've put it, as a opioid as a sort. But I think if people could let that go, that would be near miraculous. So I hope that they will take what you're saying into account. Let's move on to the stressed craver, Julia. What characterizes a person that has cravings based on stress?
Well, they are unlikely to think about a Snickers bar or anything else if they're relaxing somewhere. But if they're under the gun, there's a certain percentage of people who, under considerable stress, totally lose their appetite. And then there's another large group that eats more. And so if you're sensitive to stress and feeling overwhelmed too often, so much so that you're turning to foods to just try and keep yourself focused and able to function, then there's, again, a couple of options. But the one that we always start with, because it's the one that most people respond to immediately, is an amino acid called GABA, which is GABA, which is short for gamma-aminobutyric acid. It's the name, actually, of a neurotransmitter. So in this case, we have an amino acid, a protein constituent, and a neurotransmitter, in the same supplement form. And people who are sitting with us as we trial it in our office, for example, their shoulders will drop, and they'll just find themselves physically more relaxed. And then they realize that if we said they could have anything they wanted at that moment, they weren't interested in snack foods. If they were hungry, then they'd want a real food meal. And if not, they just didn't want anything. And typically they're very aware of this, too, the relief that this particular supplement can provide.
I've also heard that the foods with the highest GABA are fermented foods. Is that right?
I do know that there are very few foods that people who crave unhealthy substances for stress relief are actually getting nutrition from. They're getting a drug reaction from the sugar or from the crunch in the chip. And that's the problem. If they were actually consuming foods that either had enough GABA in it, or more commonly, GABA isn't really available in food so much, but the amino acids that the body can use to make GABA, those are the aminos that are available in food. And the more food they eat, the more GABA their system is generating, and that's why they no longer need the supplements after a while. But initially, this is a very important one because we typically can't get it from food.
Well, let's move on to the fifth type of craver, the fatigued craver. I think a lot of us can probably relate to a person who's just eating to keep going.
Oh, yes. And, they're having their sugar and starch with their caffeine, and they may be addicted to caffeine, including diet soda, which is highly caffeinated, of course, and, the infamous Starbucks lattes, that are so loaded with sugar. So this is the kind of thing that a type 5 fatigue craver is struggling with, and they have a choice of two amino acid solutions. The strongest is called tyrosine. And there, they would typically notice immediately after trialing even a single capsule, which is what we always like people to start with, that their energy and focus and outgoingness and optimism really perk up. They perk up naturally, and they discover who they really are in terms of energy. And by increasing protein, there's a lot of tyrosine and the other amino acid phenylalanine that can make our naturally energizing dopamine, norepinephrine, and adrenaline. And so initially we use the supplements. We're adding protein. Protein is high in these two amino acids. We've had many vegans, for example, their first meat meal, the first thing they notice is that their mental and oftentimes their physical energy is significantly better during the meal. Oftentimes they'll notice it right away because there's so much tyrosine, in particular, in animal protein.
That quickly?
Mm-hmm.
Wow. Well, we are big proponents of food being our medicine. It's really encouraging to hear you talking about how not only these amazing amino acids, but the combination of the amino acids with nutrient-dense protein and foods can really help turn our cravings around and our health around.
It's one of the reasons that I'm always so happy to speak and support the Weston A. Price in any way that I can, because I really, truly feel that it's only through the kind of traditional eating that it advocates that we have a foothold in normal nutrition. Mm-hmm. Traditional nutrients are just being lost, and our appetite for them was disappearing. So my hope is that these amino acid assists will just assist people in getting back to the traditional foods that are really going to program their whole body as well as their brain into traditional health and traditional weight.
Julia, well, I've loved this conversation because you really understand the science behind this. You're not just guessing, and you've worked with clients, so you know what's going to have the most impact. I want to ask you again the question I asked last time. I don't know if you want to give us the same answer, but if the listener could do one thing to improve their health, what would you recommend that they do?
I think I would say that they really should learn about and follow traditional food guidelines and join a Weston A. Price group.
Yeah, that's a great recommendation. Of course, I would say that. But I do think it is a great way to start because people sometimes are like, oh, how do I get traditional real foods? And every chapter leader across the country and around the world is tasked with that job of helping people find real food sources. And all these volunteers are there to help us. So I hope people will go to the website and just hit the little link that says find a local chapter and reach out to their local chapter leader so they can get on the right track. And this has been a great conversation, Julia. We are going to put links to your books and resources that we've mentioned in the podcast today so that everyone can find out what their craving type is and start to address it immediately.
Thank you, Hilda. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you, Julia. My guest today was Julia Ross. To connect with Julia, go to juliarosscures.com. For the show notes and highlights from today's episode with links to the resources we mentioned, just go to our website, westonaprice.org, and look for the show notes for episode 139. Hey, and in there, we're going to include a link to that survey you can take to find out exactly what kind of craver you are. If you are enjoying this podcast, go ahead and subscribe through Apple Podcasts so you don't miss a thing. You can rate and review us on iTunes as well. Every review lets folks know that this show is worth listening to. And thank you in advance. Next week, we get to hear from wilderness immersion expert and author Donica Markegard. I met her at Joel Salatin's farm in May, and I was blown away by her understanding of nature and her ideas on how we can all rewild ourselves and benefit from connecting and collaborating with it. So stay tuned for that episode. Also next week, everybody, I'm going to let you know about the live shows that we're lining up for California in July. It is an all-star lineup. I really couldn't be more excited. There are going to be 3 shows, one with raw milk expert Mark McAfee, one with Hillary Boynton, known as the Lunch Lady, and one with Paul Grieve of Primal Pastures. Each has some important and life-changing information you're not going to want to miss. So stay tuned for details on how to attend these events. I know tickets are going to go fast, so all the details will come in the next episode, I promise. Finally, a big thank you to my friends at Podcast Village, to Rob Ford, and the team of interns for the show. Cynthia Castro-Cohen Enriquez, Joy de los Santos, Deirdre Beard, Diva Risby, Melanie Ahern, Mary Hine, Cheryl Hufdelin, and Olga de Villiers. Our listening team includes Heather Carpentier and Victor Coseto. Amy Marvin helps with transcriptions. Last but not least, everybody, stay in touch with me and give me your feedback. Let me know what you thought of this episode and give me any ideas you might have for future ones. I'm on Twitter at Holistic Hilda. I'm on Instagram at Holistic_Hilda. Or just visit my website, holistichilda.com, so I can support you on your wellness or podcasting journey. Thanks, everybody.
Did you know that there are Weston A. Price Foundation chapters all over the U.S. and around the world? Chapter leaders help you find good food in your area, and some have meetings you can attend. Go to our website, westonaprice.org, and click on Find a Local Chapter to see if there is one near you. Wise Traditions is brought to you by the Weston A. Price Foundation for Wise Traditions in Food, Farming, and the Healing Arts. The content of this podcast is provided for informational purposes only and is not intended as a substitute for medical advice.